Welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast, made for women who want their healthiest years to be ahead of them, not behind them. Join your host, Courtney Townley, right now as she breaks down the fairy tale health story you have been chasing all of your life into sensible action steps and lasting change. Hello and welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast. This is your host, Courtney Townley, and thank you so much for taking time to be here with me, spending a little time with me today. I immensely appreciate your listenership, and I really do hope that you find this episode worth your time. I want to remind you that last month we covered the theme Women's Health Through the Ages. It was an awesome theme. We covered a lot of ground. And what I did last month is I took the opportunity each week to speak directly to different age groups of women. And specifically what I shared are the challenges that I see women facing at different ages and stages of life, specifically with their health. And I threw out my, 2 cents of wisdom through my years of experience of working with women on what I felt would really benefit women to focus on at those various ages and stages. I got a lot of great feedback from you. So thank you, those of you who wrote in, who left reviews. That never goes unnoticed, and it is so deeply appreciated. Now, we're in a new month, which normally means we have a new theme. But I've made a difficult decision this month, which is we're not going to have a theme. And in fact, this is going to be the one and only podcast of the month. If you're a regular listener of the show, you know that I'm very consistent about producing a new podcast every week, and I have for almost 3.5 years, almost 4 years. We've taken one small break before, but we are going to take another small break. Why? Because I am really just in a space of needing to take my own advice and extend myself some grace. The past 8 weeks have been a flurry of activity within Grace and Grit. My team and I have launched 2 free events that collectively served over 600 women. We ran the free 5 to Thrive event, and then we ran 3 rounds of the Make It Stick Masterclass. And then I welcomed 50 women into the 4-week consistency code program, while simultaneously working with my private clients, building a membership site, and doing my best to manage my personal life. And as much as I would love to sit here and tell you that I'm superhuman, I am not. I am very much a human, just like you, who has a limited amount of time and energy to spend. And I'm really actually quite proud to say that at this age and stage of my own life, more than ever before, I couldn't have even done this probably a few years ago. I recognize when something in my life needs to give so I don't break. Breaking myself is not a price I am willing to pay anymore. Been there, done that multiple times. I have a lot of t-shirts. So while this will be the one and only podcast that will be airing this month, I just want to assure you that I'm coming back. I'll be back in November, and we will once again deliver to you every week a new episode. But we just need a few weeks to focus on some big projects that are on our plate. We need some time to regroup around the podcast so we can get ahead of the episodes. And it's just going to be a little pause, a little 3-week pause. There are more than 185 episodes for you to listen to. And if you're one of the crazy, dedicated few who have listened to all 185 episodes already, I will be sharing episodes from other podcasts who have hosted me as a guest. And I'll be sharing those episodes definitely within the free Women of Grace and Grit Facebook community. So if you're not a member over there, you can certainly join. And I'll also be sharing those episodes on the Grace and Grit business page. And it's kind of fun for me to be on the other side of the mic and be asked pointed questions by some of these incredible podcast hosts. So that I will push out there over the course of the next few weeks. So once again, I will be back in full force in November. Today, I do want to kind of leave you with this thought and this challenge to start giving yourself permission to make decisions. Make decisions sooner. Make decisions that you have been sitting on for a long time. Because I'm a big believer that making decisions is actually a very healthy thing for us. And part of the reason I was inspired to have this conversation with you around decision making, of course, is because stepping away from the podcast for a few weeks was a really hard decision for me. And quite frankly, I probably should have made the decision a little bit sooner than I did. But having to make this decision really reminded me of how much precious life energy can be lost in the space of not making decisions. And some of you might be thinking, but Courtney, I make decisions all day long. And indeed, you do. I mean, every human on the planet is making an awful lot of decisions every day. But there are also some things in your life, some very important things in your life that you keep putting off because you just can't decide one way or the other. And that is actually a very exhausting and taxing place to live. We underestimate how much mental energy we expend by not deciding. Now, look, I'm all for thinking things through. I mean, I am all for taking your time to make a decision that feels best for you. But some of you, and you know who you are, have been sitting in a space of indecision around some things for months or years, maybe even decades, because you're afraid of making the wrong choice. And you might be convincing yourself that you're contemplating, when in fact, you're immobilized by fear. Fear of making the wrong decision. Fear of not knowing exactly what you need to do in order to move your life in that direction, to do that thing. The fear of being judged by other people. And I'll be honest, that was partly why I hesitated to pause the podcast for a few weeks. I definitely have been thinking about pausing the podcast for more than a few weeks, but I really didn't give myself the grace earlier than I should have, because I was nervous about what the listeners would think, how it would affect the show, all of these things. But when I really sat down with what it was going to cost me to push through at a time where I've met my capacity for time and energy. And unless I want to not see my family for the next month, doing the podcast is not the best choice for me. So I completely relate with all this fear. And of course, this is one small example, by the way, of decisions that I have to make on a daily basis. Fear has an amazing ability to immobilize us, which gets us nowhere, right? We don't move forward. We don't move back. We don't grow. We don't learn. Fear inspires indecision, and indecision creates this immobilized state. So what is indecision, right? It's a wavering between two or more possible courses of action, according to Google. And when you're wavering between two or more possible courses of action, that means you're not taking action. And really, the magic of life is going to happen in the action part, right? Transformation happens through action. Moving your life to higher ground happens through action. And the reality is, you could make the wrong decision. You have before. I'm sure there's some things that you look back on that you think, had I known better, I would have made a different choice. But you made the best decision with what you had at the time. You recognized you made the wrong decision, and then you just rerouted yourself. When we recognize that we've made the wrong decision, we get to learn about ourselves. And I always say, right, that when we know better, we can do better. Knowing about ourselves, learning about ourselves, understanding ourselves allows us to move forward more wisely in the future. So even if you ultimately discover that the decision you made is the wrong one, great. You know more about yourself and you can make a different decision. Why else don't we decide? Well, I definitely I spoke to the fear. I think fear is number one. We're just afraid of making the wrong decision. I also think we don't make decisions because we want to know exactly what the outcome is going to be. We want to know that we're going to be successful. We want to know, exactly how much time it's going to take, exactly what it's going to look like on the other side. We want to know that everyone's going to approve of what we're going to do. And none of that's going to happen. A big part of decision making, especially the big decisions in our life, requires enough faith in yourself that you will figure it out. Right? That's really what self-confidence is. It's the capacity to believe in yourself when you don't really know what the outcome is going to be. And we're definitely afraid of failure, right? There's that big fear piece. And part of that is we what if ourselves to death, right? What if I never get another job? Of course, because it's always worst case scenario, right? What if I don't get another job? What if the person never speaks to me again? What if I take the wrong path? What if you do? Answer that question for yourself. Because here's my belief. When things are pressing intensely on our heart, like we really know in our core what the right next step is, if we move that direction because we have that inner knowing that it's the right next thing, we're going to sort it out. So what ifing yourself to death? A lot of people will say, well, worst case scenario is that I fail. No. Worst case scenario is that you don't follow what's on your heart. So many women I work with are definitely facing health challenges, maybe partly because, yes, they're not moving their bodies as much. They could be eating better diets. Those things are true. But it is also usually very true that there is a part of their life that they are immobilized in. There is something that they have wanted to move towards for years that they have not granted themselves permission to move on. And it's oppressive. And it's life-sucking. Another reason we don't decide, we tell ourselves things like, I don't know, it's too overwhelming, it's not the right time. And all of those things are just going to feed into inaction. You're never going to move forward making a decision when you tell yourself things like, I don't know, it's too overwhelming, it's not the right time, I'm confused, right? Those are all immobilization statements. And here's another thing I see happening around decision making. Maybe you do decide. Maybe you do decide to, start that new class or sign up for something or take the new job or start writing that book, right? Whatever the thing is, maybe you do decide. But then you sabotage yourself by half-assing your commitment because you didn't really decide. It's almost like you just gave yourself permission to try it on until it got difficult. And then you retreat. I work with a lot of people will come in to work with me saying they're committed. And then it's really fascinating to see when the novelty of the work starts to wear off, like the newness of working with me starts to wear off, I really get to see how committed people are. And, it's just a truth of humanity that a lot of people are going to just commit with one toe dipped in. And you're never going to learn to swim with one toe dipped into the pool. You got to get into the pool. You got to get wet, your head, everything fully submerged, fully commit. And that's when you learn how to swim. So I would be careful definitely about not deciding. Indecision is not going to be helpful in your life. But also deciding kind of in a half-assed way is also not going to be helpful to you. You're not really giving the thing a full chance. I see this a lot with moves. I have a lot of clients, friends, and my own experience of moving across country, right? Moving to different places. And when I talk to my friends who are in the process of moving or who've just moved to a new place, they'll often say, a couple months in, I'm just so unsettled. I don't know anybody. This was a terrible decision. It's 8 weeks. And I've moved so many times in my life. And at some point, I think it was like in my early 20s, I made this pact with myself that I was not going to judge any place that I moved for at least 6 months. I think a year is probably even better. Like, I wasn't even giving it a chance if I was already judging it 4 to 6 to 8 weeks in, right? So I really needed to commit and trust that I made that decision because it felt right. What is it costing you to stay in a place of indecision? I'll tell you, for me, just deciding to pause the podcast for a few weeks, I spent way too many days stressing out about it. When had I just made a decision and I knew in my heart what the right decision was, I could have used that energy that I was wasting on worrying and contemplating and mulling it over for so many other things that are on my plate right now. So not making decisions is costing you a lot of energy, right? If you got in a pool, I don't know why I have so many pool analogies today, but I do. If you got into the pool and went to the deep end and just treaded, you just start treading water is exhausting. It is really exhausting. And that's how a lot of people are living their life. They're living in a place of being in the deep end of life, not making any decisions, and just treading water, not really moving their life in any one direction. Life is movement, not stagnation. Stagnant places, you've heard me say this before, are where things go to fester and die. Life is movement. So I think we're costing ourselves precious life energy when we don't decide. I think it also costs us a little self-respect. Because when we're not deciding that we're worth taking a risk on, right? When we aren't deciding to have faith in ourselves, when we aren't deciding that our opinion is more important than anyone else's when it comes to our life, that's going to cost us self-respect. And not making decisions is also going to cost us a whole lot of growth opportunity, right? Because we grow by being willing to get in the arena. If we get our ass kicked, we're going to grow. We're going to learn from that. Hopefully, if we look at it through the right lens, we're going to grow through our failure. And if we get in the arena and we come out on top, we're also going to grow. We're going to grow into our self-respect. It's going to be a big boost to our self-respect, to our self-trust, right? To the faith that we have in ourselves, to our self-confidence. All those things are going to grow if we succeed. But of course, I would also argue all those things are going to grow if we fail and we look at it through the right lens. Failure is not an end point. It's an entry point. An entry point into better understanding what doesn't work for you, right? So how do we decide? Well, I think you have to be very clear on your values, right? What is this life about for you? Who are you becoming? What do you want your legacy to be? And is this decision going to move you in the direction of those things? So taking some time to really get clear on where you want your life to move. And is this decision going to move you closer or further away from that? I would also say with decisions, weigh the costs. What's the cost of doing it? And what's the cost of not doing it? Right? So again, I'll use this example of just deciding to pause the podcast for a few weeks. I could do it. Absolutely. I could. But like I said earlier in the show today, I definitely wouldn't be showing up fully. I would definitely be half-assing the work because that would be all the energy that I have to dedicate to it. I would be taking more time away from my family. And other projects would suffer because, again, I know that energy is a limited resource. Although renewable, it is very limited. And the cost of not doing the podcast is, like the podcast might take a hit for that. I might upset a few people. But when I really weigh those costs against each other, it's so clear to me what the right decision is. Another thing that I think goes a long way in helping you to decide is to be willing to feel discomfort on purpose. And what I mean by that is oftentimes making the decision that is best for you is going to bring with it a lot of discomfort for all the reasons we've talked about. Because you have to take risk, because you don't know how it's going to turn out, because you don't know how other people are going to respond, because maybe you just have never really done things like that for yourself before. So there's going to be a lot of opportunity to feel very uncomfortable. But discomfort is the price of growth, right? It's unavoidable. If you want to have things, experiences, qualities of life you've never had before, you're going to have to do things you've never done before. But when you premeditate that, discomfort is definitely going to be a part of this decision, but I am willing to lean into that discomfort because there's so much benefit on the other side. That's what I mean by feeling it on purpose. I would also say to how to decide, one of the things that will help you decide is give yourself a deadline. I'm all for thinking things through, gathering information, sitting with it, chewing on it, sleeping on it. But you gotta decide. And most of us, I think, give ourselves way too much space to decide. And what's crazy is a lot of people I know that I consult with, who've made really big choices in their life, even though they sat on those choices for years, they knew years ago exactly what the right answer was, right? And then they finally gave themselves permission years later to make the decision. And then you know what happens. They say, why didn't I make this decision years ago? So more time, I think, can be just a rationalization for not stepping into the arena, right? And then I would also just say that part of deciding is giving yourself the grace and reminding yourself that you can reassess and reroute if necessary. You either succeed or you learn, right? I'm really convinced that life is a process of elimination. Health is a process of elimination. What do I mean by that? I mean, we have to be willing to try a lot of things on. It's kind of like shopping for jeans. I mean, I loathe shopping for jeans because the experience is always this. I go into a store looking for jeans. I get like 10,000 pair in the changing room. I try on 9,999 to find one that I really like. And I kind of feel like this is the process of life. We have to be willing to try on a lot of things to figure out what works and what doesn't. But if you aren't willing to get in the arena of experimentation, if you aren't willing to go in the dressing room, you're never going to figure out that fit. Right? You're never going to find the answers for you. Decision helps us to shape our life. And it doesn't always have to be the right decision. In fact, I would argue my worst decisions in my life, or I shouldn't even say they felt like the right decisions at the time. But looking back, I can see that knowing what I know now, I probably would have chosen differently. But when I look back on those decisions that I now would have chosen differently around, I really don't know if I could go back and really make that decision all over again. I don't know that I would. Because those decisions shaped my life. because I learned some really hard lessons. And I had to navigate and I had to grow and I had to become more resilient and get more educated. And had I not made the decisions that led me to doing those things, I would not be where I am in my life. So I never look at decisions as right or wrong, right? Good or bad. Decisions are either going to help move your life to higher ground or learn about how to move your life to higher ground. And both of those are awesome things. So what I want to challenge you to think about this month, and what I really would challenge you to do within the next few days, is first of all, make a list of the things that have been weighing you down mentally and emotionally, maybe even physically, because you simply have not made a decision about them. And I'm sure there's many. There's probably several things that you have not been deciding around. And for some of you, there's going to be like one really big thing that's been weighing on you. Give yourself a deadline. Set a date to decide by. For some of you, maybe that's like you've been rumbling with this idea of not hosting Christmas this year because you host it every year and you just don't want to do it this year. But you're also really afraid to give yourself permission to do that because you don't want to ripple the water. You don't want to upset people. Give yourself permission to decide. Some of you have it like a passion project on your heart. You want to start a podcast. You want to start a book, right? But you have all these reasons for not starting. Decide. Are you going to write the book or not? Are you going to start the podcast or not? Give yourself a deadline. And then be all in, right? All in doesn't mean you have to have it all figured out. All in means you are willing to figure it out. Once you decide, you are willing to figure it out. This sounds really silly, but I'll have clients come to work with me. And obviously, when you hire me as a coach, you should expect that there's going to be work involved, right? I mean, I can't do your work for you. There is going to be work involved. And I'll do initial consults to screen people to make sure we're a good fit. We get in, to working together for a few weeks. I might ask them to start working out, or I might ask them to start tracking some food so I can start learning about their behaviors. And the resistance, really comes in full force. They're paying money to work with somebody to help them. And yet there's a lot of resistance around doing the things that we're talking about. And I really believe what's behind that is, number one, a lot of interesting beliefs and thoughts. Yeah. And we do a lot of work around that. But also kind of this reality that they haven't really fully committed. Right? I'll have clients say to me, oh, well, I couldn't track food this week because I was traveling. I couldn't work out because I was at my sister's house. There are so many ways to make those things happen despite traveling, despite sleeping in someone else's home. But if we're only half committed, we're not really going to be committed to finding solutions in more challenging situations. And this is why I think committing fully to things is so stinking important. Once you decide, you have to really decide. So I hope that gives you some stuff to chew on this month around decision making, how long you sit with decisions, why you aren't making decisions, what self-confidence is for you, like what is your relationship with your own self-confidence. I think these are all things that are so important to your health because life is short, time is limited, energy is limited, and how do you want to be spending it? You don't want to be spending it just treading water in the deep end of life. You want to be moving somewhere. All right, my friends, that's all I have for you. I will see you in 3 weeks' time. And just thank you. Thank you for all your support, for helping to inspire me to produce 185 episodes. That I really feel so accomplished about that. And I'm really looking forward to 185 more. All right, I will see you in a few weeks. Have a wonderful month of October. Thank you for listening to the Grace and Grit podcast. It is time to mend the fabric of the female health story, and it starts with you taking radical responsibility for your own self-care. You are worth the effort. And with a little grace and grit, anything is possible.